Everyone in the kingdom believed Crystal Ashwood was dead. Burned with her family. Reduced to smoke and rumor. A traitor's daughter turned to ash before she could become a problem. That was the version they told themselves so they could sleep at night. They erased her name from records. Scrubbed her bloodline from history. Swore no Ashwood would ever breathe the same air as the throne again. But you already know something they don't. Crystal didn't die. She chose something worse. She ran into the Wastelands, the one place even alphas avoided because a slow death in exile was still better than a fast one in chains. Out there, the wind howled like a warning. The ground cracked beneath her feet. The rivers shimmered with toxins that killed most wolves in a single swallow. Inside her chest lived the reason. A white wolf. Not silver. Not gray. White. Ancient. Hunted. Worth more skinned than alive. For 3 years, Crystal starved herself thin enough to disappear. 3 years of sleeping in ruins, of pressing her body into dirt when patrols passed, of forcing Ivory the wolf inside her to stay quiet. To stay buried. To stay small. It almost worked. Until Daryl Kane found her. The water in the stream was poisonous. She knew it before her fingers broke the surface. It shimmered wrong, greens and purples swirling like bruises beneath skin. The smell rose thick and metallic, copper and rot clinging to the back of her throat. It wasn't meant for the living. Her cracked hands trembled anyway as she cupped it. Drink, she whispered to herself, staring at her reflection wavering on the toxic surface. Drink or die slow. The girl staring back looked nothing like 19. Hollow cheeks. Lips split from dehydration. Eyes dulled by exhaustion but still burning with something stubborn and dangerous. Scars crisscrossed her shoulders, claws, blades, teeth. Survival written into skin. She tipped her hands and swallowed. The poison slid down her throat like liquid fire. Her stomach twisted violently. She dropped to her knees in the mud, fingers digging into earth as nausea ripped through her. She couldn't throw it up. There was nothing else for miles. Every swallow was a choice. Every choice hurts. Deep inside her chest, Ivory whimpered. The white wolf was fading, a flicker of moonlight trapped beneath layers of hunger and fear. 3 years of suppression had turned a creature of legend into a ghost. It felt like drowning a star watching something brilliant suffocate in darkness. But if Ivory surfaced, if even a hint of white flashed in her eyes, Crystal wouldn't just die. She would be flayed for her pelt. Mounted in the throne room like the others. Worn as a trophy by wolves who believed power could be stitched into their skin. She would never become that. There she is. The voice cut through the wasteland like steel. Crystal froze. Daryl Kane stepped from the tree line, broad-shouldered and scarred, his enforcers fanning out behind him like shadows with teeth. 6 wolves. All loyal to the crown. All smiling like the hunt was already over. She didn't run. Running meant noise. Noise meant death. Silver chains bit into her wrists minutes later, burning deep into bone. Ivory screamed inside her mind as the metal weakened her, forcing her smaller, quieter. Crystal stumbled when they yanked her forward, mud and blood mixing beneath her feet. The Alpha King's been waiting, Daryl murmured, his grip tightening in her hair. 3 years you've embarrassed him. Made him look weak. They dragged her through villages where strangers spat at her. Through forests where children threw stones. Through gates carved with executions and conquest. By the time they reached the capital, she looked like the monster they claimed she was. The throne room doors opened. Hundreds of wolves watched. And on the throne, carved from shadow and fury, sat Alpha King Jeffrey Thorne. They forced her to her knees. The crowd didn't wait for proof. They screamed for fire. Because Jeffrey Thorne does not spare traitors. He burns them. Show me her face, the king commanded. Daryl yanked her head up. Crystal's eyes met the king's. And something shifted. His gaze dropped to her shoulder to the crescent scar burned into her flesh. The royal blood mark. Silence fell so hard it felt physical. Impossible, he whispered. The court leaned forward, hungry for blood. But Jeffrey Thorne didn't call for flames. He stepped closer. And when his fingers brushed her skin, the bond snapped into place like lightning striking dry earth. Mate. Ivory roared back to life inside her chest. The king staggered as recognition flooded his eyes, not rage, not hatred. Recognition. The girl they thought was Ash wasn't just alive. She was his. And in that single heartbeat, the kingdom's certainty began to fracture. Now listen carefully. You just witnessed how belief can be manipulated, how a kingdom can be convinced someone is dead when she's breathing the entire time. That's how the world works. That's how attention works. If you don't claim your place, someone else rewrites your story for you. So don't scroll like the rest of them. If you're still here, you're not like the crowd in that throne room waiting for someone to burn. Prove it. Like this video so it reaches someone who needs to see it before they disappear unnoticed. Comment on the city you're watching from, let me see how far this pack really stretches. And subscribe, not casually, but intentionally, because the ones who join early are the ones who get remembered when this story explodes. Or you can leave. And be just another silent face in the crowd. The ruins of the old temple smelled like death. Not the fresh kind, the sharp copper tang of new blood, but the ancient kind. The rot of forgotten bones and collapsed prayers, stone altars cracked by centuries of silence. Crystal pressed her back against a crumbling pillar, her chest heaving, her hands slick with blood that wasn't all hers. She'd killed 2 of them already. Their bodies lay sprawled in the dust, throats torn open, eyes staring at nothing. Daryl's hunters. Enforcers. Wolves who'd spent 3 years tracking her through the forbidden wastelands like she was prey worth mounting on a wall. They'd finally found her. And she'd made them pay for it. Come out, little traitor, Daryl's voice echoed through the ruins, calm and patient. He wasn't afraid. Why would he be? He had a dozen wolves surrounding the temple. She had nothing but exhaustion and a white wolf who could barely stand. You've run long enough. Time to face what you are. Crystal's fingers dug into the stone. Inside her chest, Ivory whimpered a sound like breaking glass. Her white wolf was dying. 3 years of starvation, of drinking poisoned water, of sleeping in frozen mud had carved her down to a ghost. She couldn't shift. Not fully. Not without collapsing and never getting back up. They were out of options. I know you're in there, Daryl continued, his boots crunching over rubble as he stepped into the temple's shadow. I can smell your blood. You're wounded. Weak. Just give up. Make this easy. Crystal closed her eyes and let herself remember. 3 years ago, she'd watched her family burn. The Ashwoods, the people who raised her, fed her, loved her, dragged into the town square and set on fire while the crowd screamed traitor over and over until the word lost all meaning. She'd been 13, hidden in the crowd, forced to watch as the only parents she'd ever known turned to ash. That night, she ran. Into the wastelands. Into the poisoned rivers and dead forests where even rogue wolves feared to tread. She learned to hunt rats and drink from streams that burned her throat. She learned to sleep in mud and fight off scavengers twice her size. She learned that survival wasn't about being strong. It was about being too stubborn to die. For 3 years, she'd been a ghost. A shadow. A dead girl walking. And now Daryl wanted to drag her back to the capital. Back to the Alpha King. Back to the throne where Jeffrey Thorne would execute her in front of the entire court, just like he'd executed her family. She wouldn't go quietly. Crystal lunged from behind the pillar, a shard of broken stone gripped in her bloody fist. She drove it toward Daryl's throat, fast, desperate, feral. He caught her wrist mid-strike. There she is, he said, almost fondly. Then he twisted. Crystal's wrist snapped. The sound was wet and sharp, like a branch breaking underwater. Pain exploded up her arm, white-hot and blinding. She screamed a raw, animal sound and Daryl slammed her into the ground so hard her vision went black. When she came to, silver chains were already burning into her wrists. She thrashed, snarling, trying to pull free. But the silver bit deeper, searing through her skin like acid. Ivory howled inside her mind, a desperate, dying sound. The metal was poison to wolves. It stripped their strength, muffled their instincts, and made them human. Made them helpless. Stop fighting, Daryl said, hauling her to her feet by the chains. You're only making it worse. Crystal spat blood at his boots. Go to hell. He smiled. It was a terrible smile, all teeth and cruelty. The Alpha King's been waiting for you, Crystal Ashwood. 3 years you've embarrassed him. Made him look weak for letting a traitor's daughter escape. That ends today. He leaned in close, his scarred face inches from hers. Up close, he smelled like iron and smoke. Like executions. You should have stayed dead, he whispered. They dragged her out of the temple and into the daylight. The sun was too bright after years of living in the shadows. Crystal squinted against it, her broken wrist dangling uselessly, her bare feet stumbling over rocks and roots as Daryl's hunters formed a circle around her. The march to the capital took 3 days. 3 days of silver burning through her wrists. 3 days of villagers throwing stones and screaming traitor as they passed. 3 days of Daryl's enforcers kicking her when she fell, dragging her back to her feet, forcing her to keep walking. By the 3rd day, Crystal couldn't feel her hands anymore. The silver had eaten through to bone, leaving raw, weeping wounds that wouldn't heal. Her clothes were soaked with blood and mud. Her hair hung in matted tangles. She looked like a corpse. She felt like one too. But she didn't break. Even when they reached the capital, the towering black walls of the royal citadel rose like tombstones against the sky. Even when the crowd gathered to watch her arrival, jeering and spitting and calling for her blood, even then, she kept her head up. She wouldn't give them her fear. Daryl hauled her through the gates and into the castle corridors. Torches lined the walls, casting flickering shadows that danced like demons. Servants pressed themselves against the stone as they passed, their eyes wide with horror and fascination. Guards in black armor watched in silence, hands on their sword hilts. They knew where she was going. Everyone knew. The execution chamber. The throne of judgment. Excited? Daryl asked, yanking the chain so hard Crystal stumbled. The whole court's waiting for you. Every noble, every warrior, every highborn wolf in the kingdom. They've come to watch the last Ashwood die. Crystal said nothing. She focused on breathing. On keeping Ivory quiet. On burying the white wolf so deep that even Jeffrey's alpha senses wouldn't find her. If the king discovered what she was, if he saw the white glow of Ivory's eyes when she shifted, her death wouldn't be quick. It would be a spectacle. They turned a corner, and the corridor opened into a massive antechamber. The crowd noise hit her like a physical wall, hundreds of voices chanting, screaming, demanding blood. Beyond the antechamber, 2 massive oak doors loomed. Carved with scenes of conquest and execution. The royal crest, a black wolf rampant against a crimson field, glared down at her. Behind those doors was Alpha King Jeffrey Thorne. Behind those doors was her death. Daryl stopped at the threshold. He grabbed her face, forcing her to look at him one last time. Any last words, traitor? Crystal met his eyes. Her voice was a rasp, broken and raw, but steady. I survived 3 years in hell, she said. You think your king scares me? Daryl laughed. He should. He nodded to the guards. The doors groaned open. The throne room blazed with torchlight, a cathedral of fire and shadow. And at the end of the hall, seated on a throne of blackened steel, sat the Alpha King waiting to watch her die. The throne room was a cathedral of judgment. Torches blazed along the walls, casting dancing shadows across hundreds of faces, nobles in silk and jewels, warriors in black armor, servants pressed into corners with wide, hungry eyes. All of them staring. All of them were waiting. The air reeked of anticipation, thick and suffocating, like the moment before a storm breaks. Crystal's knees hit the stone floor with a crack that echoed through the silence. The silver chains dragged her down, heavy and burning, forcing her into submission. She gasped as pain shot up her shattered wrist, white-hot and blinding, but she bit down on her tongue to keep from screaming. She wouldn't give them that satisfaction. Traitor, someone shouted from the crowd. The word rippled through the hall like fire catching dry grass. Within seconds, the entire court was chanting, their voices building into a roar that shook the torches in their sconces. Traitor! 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 Crystal kept her head bowed, her wet hair plastering her face, hiding her expression. Let them scream. Let them hate her. She'd been called worse. She'd survived worse. But then the chanting stopped. The silence that followed was absolute. Suffocating. Crystal felt the weight of a gaze on her, heavy, burning, impossible to ignore. She didn't need to look up to know who it belonged to. Alpha King Jeffrey Thorne. She could feel his power from across the room. It pressed against her like a physical force, crushing and ancient, the kind of dominance that made wolves drop to their bellies and bare their throats. Even Ivory, half dead and buried deep inside Crystal's chest, stirred weakly in response. Footsteps echoed across the stone. Slow. Deliberate. Each one a drumbeat of inevitability. The king was descending from his throne. Crystal's heart hammered against her ribs. She forced herself to breathe. To stay still. To keep Ivory locked down. If the white wolf surfaced now, if her eyes glowed ice blue for even a second, Jeffrey would see. He would know. And her death would become a spectacle instead of an execution. The footsteps stopped directly in front of her. Show me her face. The king's voice was cold. Commanding. Final. It wasn't a request. It was an alpha order, laced with power that made Crystal's bones ache. Daryl grabbed her by the hair and wrenched her head up. Pain exploded across her scalp, but Crystal swallowed it. She lifted her eyes slowly, forcing herself to look at the man who'd ordered her family's execution. The man who'd turned her into a fugitive. The man who was about to kill her. Jeffrey Thorne stood above her like a god carved from shadow. He was massive, easily 6.5 feet of solid muscle wrapped in black armor and dark furs. His face was all sharp angles and brutal beauty, high cheekbones, a jaw that could have been chiseled from granite, a mouth set in a hard, unforgiving line. But it was his eyes that stole the air from Crystal's lungs. Amber. Burning gold. Like twin suns staring into her soul. For a moment, neither of them moved. Jeffrey's expression was unreadable cold fury mixed with something Crystal couldn't name. His gaze raked over her, the blood-soaked rags, the silver chains eating through her wrists, the bruises and cuts covering every visible inch of skin. Then his eyes dropped to her shoulder. To the torn fabric exposing her left collarbone. To the crescent-shaped scar burned into her flesh. Jeffrey's entire body went rigid. His eyes widened not with recognition, but with shock so profound it bordered on horror. He stepped closer, his massive frame blocking out the torchlight, and reached toward her shoulder with one gloved hand. "Remove the chains," he said quietly. Daryl's grip on Crystal's hair tightened. "Your Majesty, she's dangerous." "The silver." "I said remove them." Jeffrey's voice dropped into a growl that vibrated through the stone floor. "Alpha command. Absolute. Undeniable." Daryl's hands fell away as if burned. One of the guards stepped forward and unlocked the silver manacles. The moment the metal left Crystal's skin, relief flooded through her, but it was short-lived. Jeffrey's fingers brushed her shoulder, tracing the edge of the crescent scar with shocking gentleness. The instant his skin touched hers, the world exploded. It felt like lightning striking her chest. Like a door inside her soul being kicked open. Like every nerve in her body suddenly catching fire. Crystal gasped, her entire body arching as something ancient and primal snapped into place between them. The mate bond. No. No, this was impossible. Jeffrey stumbled back a step, his hand jerking away from her shoulder like he'd been burned. His eyes flared pure gold, wolf surfacing, snarling with recognition. His chest heaved, his fists clenching and unclenching as he fought for control. Inside Crystal's mind, Ivory surged to life. The white wolf, weak and dying just moments ago, suddenly roared with power she shouldn't have. Her voice echoed through Crystal's skull, primal and absolute. "Mate. Mate. Mate." "No," Crystal whispered, shaking her head. This couldn't be happening. This man executed her family. This man hunted her for 3 years. This man was supposed to kill her. He couldn't be her mate. But the bond didn't care about logic. It didn't care about history or bloodlines or justice. It just existed, a thread of starlight connecting her soul to his, pulling tight, demanding recognition. Jeffrey took another step back, his amber eyes locked on hers with an intensity that made her chest ache. She saw the war playing out on his face, confusion, fury, denial, and something darker. Something that looked almost like pain. "What is your name?" he asked, his voice rough. Crystal's throat was dry. "You know my name. Say it." "Crystal." Her voice cracked. "Crystal Ashwood." Jeffrey's jaw clenched. His gaze dropped to her shoulder again, to the crescent scar that seemed to burn brighter under the torchlight. He reached up, pulling aside the fur collar of his armor to expose his own left shoulder. An identical scar. Crescent-shaped. Unmistakable. The royal blood mark. The court erupted into whispers. Shocked. Confused. Horrified. Darryl stepped forward, his scarred face twisted with barely controlled panic. Your Majesty, this changes nothing. She is the daughter of traitors. The Ashwood bloodline is tainted. She must die. Jeffrey didn't look at him. His eyes were still fixed on Crystal, searching her face like he was trying to solve an impossible puzzle. The Ashwoods were not her family, Jeffrey said slowly, as if testing the words. They raised her. But that scar, he pointed at her shoulder, only appears on those born of Thorne blood. The hall went silent. Crystal's mind reeled. That was impossible. She was an Ashwood. She'd lived with them for 13 years. They'd loved her, raised her, taught her to hunt and fight and survive. They were her family. Weren't they? You're lying, Crystal whispered. I don't lie. Jeffrey's voice was flat. Final. He turned to address the court, his alpha presence flooding the room. This execution is suspended. Take her to the royal cells. I will question her myself. Your Majesty, you can't, Darryl started. Are you questioning your king? Jeffrey's voice was a whip crack. The air pressure in the room shifted, heavy and dangerous. Every wolf in the hall, noble and servant alike, dropped their eyes in submission. Except Darryl. His hands were shaking. His scent spiked with something Crystal recognized from years of survival, fear mixed with desperation. He was terrified. But why? What did he have to lose if she lived? Of course not, Your Majesty, Darryl said through gritted teeth. He bowed stiffly. I live to serve. Jeffrey's eyes narrowed. Good. Then serve by staying out of my way. He gestured to 2 royal guards, massive wolves in black armor bearing the crown's crest. Take her to the North Tower. Cell 3. No one enters except me. No one speaks to her. And if she's harmed in any way, his amber eyes swept the room, lingering on Darryl. I'll consider it an act of treason. The guards moved forward, lifting Crystal to her feet. Her broken wrist screamed in protest, but she forced herself to stand. To walk. To keep her head up as they led her toward a side door. As she passed Jeffrey, their eyes met one more time. The mate bond pulled tight between them, a living thing neither of them wanted but couldn't deny. I didn't kill your family, Jeffrey said quietly. Only she could hear him. But I'm going to find out who did. Then the guards pulled her through the door, and the throne room disappeared behind her. In the darkness of her cell, Crystal heard footsteps hours later. Heavy. Measured. Deliberate. The king was coming. And he had questions she didn't know how to answer. The cell was a cage carved from stone and silence. No windows. No light except the pale glow of a single torch guttering in the corridor outside the iron bars. The air was damp and cold, smelling of mold and old blood of centuries of prisoners who'd rotted in this exact spot before her. Crystal sat against the far wall, knees drawn to her chest, cradling her broken wrist against her ribs. Her whole body ached. The silver burns on her wrists wept clear fluid that wouldn't stop. Every breath sent sharp pains through her ribs where Darryl's enforcers had kicked her during the march. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the chaos screaming inside her head. The mate bond. It pulsed between her and the king like a living thing, a thread of starlight she could feel even through stone walls and locked doors. It pulled at her chest, warm and insistent, whispering things she didn't want to hear. Safe. Home. Mine. Inside her mind, ivory paced. The white wolf had come roaring back to life the moment Jeffrey touched Crystal's shoulder, and now she wouldn't settle. She kept throwing herself against the mental barriers Crystal had built, desperate to break free, to shift, to run straight to their mate. Stop, Crystal whispered into the darkness. He's not ours. He can't be. Ivory snarled in response. Mate. Ours. Claim. He executed the people who raised me. Not family. Liars. Mate is truth. Crystal pressed her forehead against her knees. Her wolf didn't understand. Couldn't understand. To Ivory, the mate bond was absolute biology and instinct wrapped into something sacred and undeniable. But Crystal was human enough to know that biology didn't erase history. Jeffrey Thorne had destroyed her life. The fact that her soul recognized him as her other half didn't change that. Footsteps echoed down the corridor. Crystal's head snapped up. Heavy boots on stone. Measured. Deliberate. Not the nervous shuffle of guards or the quick steps of servants. This was someone who walked like they owned the ground beneath their feet. The footsteps stopped outside her cell. Alpha King Jeffrey Thorne stood on the other side of the bars, backlit by torchlight, his massive frame casting shadows that swallowed half the corridor. He'd removed his armor. Now he wore only black trousers and a dark shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, exposing forearms corded with muscle and marked with old scars. He looked less like a king and more like a predator. His amber eyes found hers in the darkness. The mate bond flared hot between them, and Crystal saw him flinch just barely like he'd been burned. "You shouldn't be here," Crystal said. Her voice was rough from screaming during the march. "Isn't it against protocol for a king to visit condemned prisoners alone?" "You're not condemned." Jeffrey's voice was low, controlled. "Not anymore." "Then what am I?" "That," he said quietly, "is what I'm here to find out." He produced a key from his pocket and unlocked the cell door. The hinges screamed as it swung open. Crystal scrambled to her feet, pressing her back against the cold stone wall. Every instinct told her to run. To fight. To do anything except let him get closer. But there was nowhere to go. Jeffrey stepped inside the cell. The space was barely 10 feet across. With him in it, the walls felt like they were closing in. He radiated heat and power, his alpha presence filling every corner until Crystal could barely breathe. "Stay back," she warned. He stopped. Held up his hands. "I'm not here to hurt you. You already did. You killed my family. The Ashwoods weren't your family." Crystal's fists clenched. "Don't you dare." "That scar on your shoulder," Jeffrey interrupted, his eyes dropping to the crescent mark barely visible through her torn shirt. "Do you know what it is?" "A birthmark. It's the Thorne blood mark." He pulled his collar aside again, revealing the identical scar. "Only those born of royal blood carry it. It appears when we're infants burned into our skin by the magic in our bloodline. No two are exactly alike, but they all share the same shape. The crescent moon." Crystal's jaw tightened. "You're lying." "I don't lie." Jeffrey took another step forward. 19 years ago, my parents King Aldrich and Queen Seraphine were murdered in a coup. Their throats were slit in their sleep. I was 7 years old. I survived because I was sleeping in the nursery. But my baby sister," his voice cracked, "just barely. She was stolen from her crib. Disappeared without a trace. We searched for months. Years. But we never found her body. Eventually, we assumed she was dead." Crystal's heart hammered against her ribs. "That has nothing to do with me. Doesn't it?" Jeffrey's eyes burned into hers. "My sister would be 19 now. Exactly your age. She had dark hair. Blue-gray eyes. And a crescent scar on her left shoulder." "Stop. The Ashwoods were executed 13 years ago for treason. They were accused of conspiring with rogues to overthrow the crown. But I never believed it. They were loyal. Honest. They had no reason to betray us." He stepped closer. Close enough that Crystal could smell him cedar and rain and something wild. Unless they were protecting something. Or someone. Crystal shook her head violently. "You're insane." "Am I?" Jeffrey reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and touched the scar on her shoulder. The moment his fingers made contact, the mate bond roared to life. It slammed into Crystal like a tidal wave. Heat exploded through her chest, racing down her spine, flooding every nerve with liquid fire. Ivory surged forward, howling with desperate need, and for a split second Crystal's eyes flashed ice blue. Jeffrey's pupils dilated. His wolf rises to meet hers. "No." Crystal snarled and lunged. She moved on pure instinct, grabbed the front of Jeffrey's shirt and slammed him against the bars with strength she shouldn't have. The iron rang like a bell. Her broken wrist screamed in protest, but she ignored it. She got in his face, breathing hard, her nails digging into his chest. "I am Crystal Ashwood," she spat. "Daughter of Marcus and Elena Ashwood. You burned them alive in front of a crowd. You made me watch. I spent 3 years surviving in hell because of you. So don't you dare stand here and tell me they weren't my family." Jeffrey didn't fight back. He could have. He was stronger, bigger, an alpha king who could snap her in half without effort. But he just stood there, letting her rage, his eyes never leaving hers. "They raised you," he said quietly. "They loved you. But they weren't your blood. Blood doesn't matter. It does when someone's trying to kill you for it." Crystal froze. "What?" Jeffrey's expression darkened. "The coup that killed my parents wasn't random. It was calculated. Surgical. Whoever orchestrated it wanted the Thorne bloodline wiped out completely. They murdered my parents. They stole you. And when the Ashwoods refused to give you up, when they tried to hide you, they were framed for treason and executed." Crystal's grip on his shirt loosened. Her mind was spinning. "That doesn't make sense. Why would anyone?" "Because you're proof that the bloodline survived. You're a threat." Jeffrey's hand came up, cupping her face with shocking gentleness. His thumb brushed her cheekbone. "And if you really are my sister, if that scar means what I think it means, then someone's been hunting you for 19 years. Someone who wants the Thorne family dead." Crystal's breath caught. The world tilted sideways. Everything she knew, every memory, every moment of her life suddenly felt like it was built on lies. The Ashwoods weren't her parents. Jeffrey wasn't her enemy. She wasn't a traitor's daughter. She was stolen royalty. And someone had killed her real family to take the throne. "I don't," her voice broke. "I don't understand." "Neither do I. Not yet." Jeffrey's other hand came up, framing her face. The mate bond burned between them, hot and undeniable. "But we're going to find out. Together." Ivory was screaming now. Not in rage, but in recognition. In relief. In desperate, aching need. "Mate. Protect. Mine. Keep." Crystal's eyes stung. She didn't cry. Hadn't cried in 3 years. But her chest felt like it was being torn apart from the inside, and she didn't know if it was grief or fury or the mate bond trying to fuse her soul to his. "Why does it hurt?" she whispered. "The bond. Why does it feel like this?" Jeffrey's amber eyes softened. "Because you're fighting it. And so am I. You feel it too? Every second." His thumb traced her jaw. "It's been screaming at me since the moment I saw you. My wolf wants to tear down these walls and claim you. But you're my sister. Or you're supposed to be." And that bond, he swallowed hard. It shouldn't exist. Crystal's hands were still fisted in his shirt. She should let go. Should step back. Should put distance between them before the pull got worse. But she didn't move. "The Ashwoods didn't betray you," she said finally. "They died protecting me. I know. And someone framed them." "Yes. Who?" Jeffrey's jaw clenched. "That's what we need to find out." Crystal's world was shattering. Everything she thought she knew, gone. Replaced with questions that had no answers and a bond that shouldn't exist. If she wasn't a traitor, then who killed her real family? And why did the mate bond feel like it was tearing her apart from the inside? The dress felt like a noose. Crystal stood in front of the mirror in the guest chambers they'd moved her to, a gilded prison with silk sheets and windows that didn't open. The gown was deep emerald green, tailored to fit her lean frame, with long sleeves that covered the silver burns on her wrists. It was beautiful. Expensive. Everything she'd never been. She hated it. "You look like a lady," the servant girl said nervously, adjusting the fabric on Crystal's shoulders. "The court will be impressed." Crystal met her own eyes in the mirror. They stared back, wild, feral, wrong. You could dress a wolf in silk, but it didn't make it tame. It just made it easier to see the teeth. "I look like a prisoner," Crystal said flatly. The servant didn't argue. 2 royal guards escorted her through the castle corridors toward the Great Hall. Not chains this time, but the hands on their sword hilts made it clear she wasn't free. She was the king's lost sister. The stolen princess. The living proof that someone had orchestrated a coup 19 years ago. And the court was waiting to tear her apart. The Great Hall was a cathedral of wealth and power. Massive stone pillars supported a vaulted ceiling painted with scenes of conquest. Long tables stretched the length of the room, covered in silk and silver. Nobles in expensive furs and jewels sat on velvet cushions, their eyes tracking Crystal's entrance like predators watching wounded prey. The whispers started immediately. That's her? The traitor's daughter? She looks feral. I heard she attacked the king in her cell. Crystal kept her spine straight and her eyes forward. Let them whisper. Let them stare. She'd survived 3 years in the Wastelands. She could survive a few hours of nobles judging her table manners. Jeffrey sat at the head table on a throne-like chair carved from blackened oak. He wore full royal regalia, black and crimson, the crown of thorns resting on his dark hair. He looked every inch the Alpha King. Untouchable. Absolute. But when his amber eyes found hers across the hall, the mate bond flared hot between them. Crystal stumbled. One of the guards caught her elbow. Careful, my lady. She yanked her arm free and kept walking. Lady Morgana Thorne sat to Jeffrey's right, his aunt, the senior member of the Royal Council. She was elegant in deep purple silk, her silver hair coiled in an elaborate crown of braids. Her smile was warm, but her eyes were cold as winter. Welcome, child, Morgana said as Crystal approached. Her voice carried across the hall, sweet as poisoned honey. We are so relieved to have you home. It's a miracle you survived. Crystal didn't miss the way her lips curled around the world. Like it was an accusation instead of a compliment. Thank you, Lady Morgana. The words tasted like ash. Jeffrey gestured to the empty seat on his left. Sit. It wasn't a request. Crystal sat. The moment she did, every conversation in the hall shifted. She could hear them now, louder, bolder, certain she couldn't fight back. The king's bewitched, someone whispered from 3 tables over. She's using magic to cloud his judgment. She has his eyes, another murmured. But that doesn't prove blood. Scars can be faked. I heard she's a white wolf. That's why she hid in the Wastelands. She's dangerous. Crystal's hands clenched under the table. Inside her chest, Ivory snarled low and threatening. The white wolf hated being caged almost as much as Crystal did. Kill them. Rip throats. Make them kneel. Not yet, Crystal whispered under her breath. Jeffrey leaned toward her, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Ignore them. Easy for you to say. They worship you. They fear me. That's different. His hand moved under the table just barely and brushed against hers. The touch was light. Accidental. But the mate bond roared to life, sending heat racing up her arm. Crystal jerked her hand away. Don't. Jeffrey's jaw tightened. I wasn't. Yes, you were. His wolf shadow, she'd learned his name somehow through the bond, rumbled in response. Crystal felt him like a living presence in the back of her mind. Massive. Midnight black. Protective and possessive in equal measure. Shadow wanted her. I wanted Ivory. I wanted to claim and protect and never let go. And Ivory wanted him back. It was a disaster waiting to happen. Daryl Kane entered the hall halfway through the first course. He moved like a man walking to his own execution, stiff, controlled, his scarred face carefully blank. But Crystal could smell his fear from across the room. Acrid. Sharp. The scent of a predator realizing it had become prey. He bowed to Jeffrey. Your Majesty. Daryl. Jeffrey's voice was ice. I trust you've been cooperative with the investigation? Of course, my king. I live to serve the crown. His eyes flicked to Crystal. Just for a second. But she saw the calculation there. The desperation. His entire career was built on the traitor narrative. If the Ashwoods were innocent, if they'd been framed, then Daryl's credibility crumbled. He'd been the lead enforcer on the case. He'd presented the evidence. He'd secured the execution order. If they were innocent, then either he was incompetent or complicit. Crystal made a mental note. Daryl was dangerous. And desperate men did desperate things. After the dinner, an ordeal of 6 courses she barely touched, Jeffrey took her to the Royal Archives. The room was a maze of shelves and scrolls, centuries of records preserved under layers of dust and magical wards. You wanted to investigate, Jeffrey said, unlocking a cabinet marked Treason Trials Classified. Start here. These are the original trial records for the Ashwood case. Crystal's hands shook as she pulled out the first scroll. 13 years of wondering. 13 years of hating the people who'd killed her family. And now she was about to read their death sentence. The charges were extensive. Conspiracy with rogues. Plotting against the crown. Harboring stolen goods, namely, a royal infant. But it was the evidence list that made Crystal's blood run cold. Intercepted letters. Witness testimonies. A confession, allegedly given by her father under interrogation. All of it signed and verified by royal enforcer Daryl Kane. He built the case, Crystal whispered. Jeffrey stood behind her, close enough that she could feel his body heat. He was the king's trusted hound. If he said the evidence was solid, no one questioned it. But what if it wasn't? Crystal flipped through more documents. What if he planted it? Then we need proof. They worked side by side for hours. Jeffrey teaches her how to read the formal court language, how to cross-reference dates and signatures, how to spot inconsistencies in testimonies. Every time their hands brushed reaching for the same scroll, the mate bond pulled tighter. Crystal tried to ignore it. I tried to focus on the documents. But Shadow and Ivory were circling each other in the back of their minds, 2 wolves drawn together by instinct stronger than logic. Mate close. Safe. Good. Want mate. Need mate. Claim soon. Stop it, Crystal muttered. Jeffrey looked up. What? Not you. Her. Crystal pressed a hand to her chest where Ivory was practically vibrating with need. My wolf. She won't shut up about it, she cut herself off. Jeffrey's eyes darkened. About the bond? Crystal nodded. Shadow's the same. Jeffrey set down the scroll he'd been reading. He's been trying to force a shift since the throne room. Wants to, he stopped. Cleared his throat. I want to claim you. The air between them thickened. We can't, Crystal said. Even if I'm not your sister, I was raised as one. It's wrong. I know. And I still don't trust you. I know that too. So why does it feel like this? Crystal's voice cracked. Why does being near you make everything worse and better at the same time? Jeffrey stepped closer. Too close. Close enough that Crystal could see the flecks of gold in his amber eyes, and could feel his breath against her skin. Because it's a mate bond, he said quietly. And mate bonds don't care about logic or politics or anything except that you're mine and I'm yours. I'm not yours. Not yet. His hand came up, cupping her face. But you will be. Crystal should have pulled away. Should have reminded him they were supposed to be siblings. Should have put distance between them before the bond got worse. But she didn't. Instead, she leaned into his touch, just slightly, and hated herself for it. In the dead of night, long after Jeffrey had escorted her back to her chambers, Crystal returned to the archives alone. She'd seen something. A date that didn't match. A signature that looked forced. She pulled out the evidence logs and spread them across the table, tracing the timeline backward. And there it was. A document signed by Daryl Kane, dated the day before the treason was discovered. It was a requisition order. 4 silver chains. Wolfsbane. Execution stakes. He'd ordered the execution supplies before the crime was even reported. He'd known. He'd planned it all. Crystal didn't wait for permission. She stormed into the throne room mid-session, the document clutched in her fist, still dressed in the sleeping clothes they'd given her, soft linen that felt wrong against her skin. The court was in full assembly, nobles and warriors packed into the hall discussing trade agreements and border disputes like the world wasn't built on lies. Every head turned. Jeffrey rose from his throne, his expression shifting from surprise to something darker. Crystal. Where is he? Her voice cut through the whispers like a blade. Where's Daryl Kane? A ripple of shock moved through the crowd. Ladies clutched their pearls. Warriors exchanged glances. Lady Morgana's eyes narrowed from her seat beside the throne. Daryl stood near the back of the hall, dressed in his enforcer leathers, a picture of calm authority. But Crystal could smell him across the room, that sharp, acrid scent of fear buried under layers of false confidence. He bowed slightly. Lady Crystal. How may I serve? Crystal walked down the center aisle, her bare feet silent on the stone. She stopped 10 feet from him and held up the document. This is a requisition order. Your signature. Dated 3 days before the Ashwood treason was discovered. The hall went silent. Daryl's smile didn't waver. I don't understand what you're suggesting. You ordered execution supplies before anyone knew there was a crime. Crystal's voice was steady. Cold. Silver chains. Wolfsbane. Stakes. Everything you needed to burn my family alive. You knew they were going to be convicted because you were the one who framed them. Gasps echoed through the hall. Nobles shifted in their seats. Warriors' hands moved to their weapons. Daryl laughed. It was a warm, indulgent sound, like a father dealing with a child's wild imagination. With all respect, Lady Crystal, you've been through tremendous trauma. 3 years in the Wastelands would strain anyone's mind. It's understandable that you'd grasp at straws, looking for someone to blame. I'm not grasping at anything. Crystal stepped closer. This is your signature. Your handwriting. Your crime. That's a standard requisition form. Daryl's voice remained calm, reasonable. Enforcers order supplies regularly. The date is coincidental. Coincidental? Crystal's voice rose. You ordered the exact tools needed to execute them 3 days before they were accused? I ordered tools we use for many purposes. That proves nothing. The crowd murmured. Crystal could feel their skepticism. Daryl had been the king's enforcer for decades. A respected warrior. A loyal servant. And she was a feral girl who'd lived in the Wastelands for 3 years. Who would they believe? Enough. Jeffrey's voice cracked like thunder. He descended from the throne, his alpha presence flooding the room. If there are questions about the Ashwood trial, they will be answered. Properly. Officially. Daryl bowed. Of course, Your Majesty. I'm convening a formal tribunal. Jeffrey's amber eyes burned. 3 days from now. You will answer every question about your investigation. Every piece of evidence will be reviewed. Every witness re-examined. For the first time, Daryl's mask slipped. Just for a second. Crystal saw panic flicker across his scarred face before he buried it. As you command, my king. His voice was tight. I welcome the opportunity to clear my name. But Crystal saw the truth in his eyes. He wasn't planning to wait 3 days. That night, Crystal couldn't sleep. She paced her chambers like a caged animal, ivory restless inside her chest. The white wolf had been agitated all day, pacing and snarling, sensing danger Crystal couldn't see yet. Wrong. Danger. Hunt coming. I know, Crystal whispered. I feel it too. She changed back into her old clothes, the torn tunic and leather wraps she'd worn in the Wastelands. The silk nightgowns they'd given her were too restrictive. If something happened, she needed to move. The window was locked. The door was guarded. But Crystal had learned long ago that locked doors meant nothing to someone determined enough. She heard them at midnight. The softest scrape of metal on metal. The window lock being picked. Crystal grabbed the iron poker from the fireplace and pressed herself against the wall beside the window, heart hammering. The window swung open silently. 3 figures dressed in black slipped inside, faces covered, movements practiced. Assassins. Professional. They fanned out across the room, searching. One of them whispered, "She's supposed to be in the bed." Crystal moved. She swung the poker like a club, catching the first assassin across the temple. He dropped without a sound. The second one spun, knife flashing. Crystal ducked under the blade and drove her shoulder into his gut, slamming him into the wall. The third assassin grabbed her from behind, arm wrapping around her throat. Got you, traitor, he hissed. Ivory exploded. The white wolf surged forward, not a full shift, but a partial emergence. Crystal felt her eyes burn ice blue, felt strength flood her muscles like liquid lightning. Her canines lengthened. Her nails sharpened to claws. She grabbed the assassin's arm and threw him over her shoulder with inhuman strength. He crashed into the furniture hard enough to splinter wood. The second assassin lunged again, knife aimed for her throat. Crystal caught his wrist mid-strike, her clawed hand crushing bone. He screamed. She twisted, forcing him to his knees, then slammed his head into the floor. Silence. 3 unconscious bodies. Broken furniture. And Crystal standing in the center of it all, chest heaving, eyes still glowing ice blue. Ivory was still partially surfaced, lending Crystal her strength, her senses, her rage. The white wolf wanted to finish this. I wanted to tear throats and taste blood. Kill. Threat. Eliminate. No. Crystal forced Ivory back down, feeling the glow fade from her eyes. Not yet. She crouched beside the nearest assassin and pulled down his mask. She didn't recognize his face, but she didn't need to. She pressed her nose to his collar and inhaled. Beneath the scent of sweat and leather was something else. Iron. Smoke. And that particular combination of fear and cruelty that belonged to only one man. Daryl Kane. His scent was all over these assassins' clothes. He'd hired them. Send them. Tried to kill her before the tribunal could expose him. The door burst open. Jeffrey stood in the doorway, Shadow's gold eyes blazing behind his human ones. He was shirtless, armed only with a sword, clearly having run from his own chambers when he felt, what? The mate bond screaming danger? His gaze swept the room. Took in the broken furniture. The unconscious assassins. Crystal standing in the center of it all, blood on her knuckles, her eyes still faintly glowing. What happened? His voice was lethal and calm. Daryl sent them. Crystal gestured to the bodies. His scents on their clothes. He tried to kill me before the tribunal. Jeffrey's expression went from protective to apocalyptic. He crossed the room in 3 strides, his hands framing her face, tilting it to check for injuries. Are you hurt? No. You're bleeding. It's not mine. Crystal's adrenaline was crashing. Her hands started to shake. I fought them off. Ivory came out. Just enough to. Shoo. Jeffrey pulled her against his chest, his arms wrapping around her. The mate bond flared hot between them, but this time it wasn't desired. It was pure protective fury radiating from Shadow, demanding that his mate be safe, be protected, be untouchable. Crystal should have pushed him away. Should have reminded him they weren't supposed to touch like this. But she was tired. I'm so tired. And he was warm. Solid. Safe. They're getting desperate, Jeffrey said against her hair. You're not safe here. I'm not running. I'm not asking you to. He pulled back just enough to meet her eyes. But you're moving to my private wing. My chambers. Where I can protect you. Jeffrey. This isn't negotiable. His voice dropped into Alpha Command. Daryl's running out of time and options. Which makes him more dangerous than ever. If he's willing to send assassins into the royal guest wing, he'll try again. And next time, you might not be so lucky. Crystal wanted to argue. Wanted to prove she could handle herself. But the truth was, sharing Jeffrey's space being close to him terrified her more than any assassin. Because the mate bond wanted them closer. And they were both running out of strength to fight it. Jeffrey moved Crystal to his private wing. Sharing his space. Fighting the bond that wanted them closer. And Daryl was running out of time. Jeffrey's private study was smaller than Crystal expected. No throne room grandeur. No excessive displays of wealth. Just bookshelves carved from dark wood, a massive desk covered in maps and correspondence, and a fireplace crackling with low flames that cast dancing shadows across the stone walls. It felt lived in. Real. More like a wolf's den than a king's chamber. Crystal stood by the window, arms wrapped around herself, staring out at the city lights below. 2 days since the assassination attempt. 2 days of being trapped in Jeffrey's private wing, surrounded by guards, suffocating under the weight of enforced proximity. 2 days of the mate bond pulling tighter with every breath. Behind her, she heard Jeffrey moving through the study, the soft rustle of parchment, the clink of a glass being set down, the creak of leather as he settled into the chair behind his desk. She didn't turn around. If she looked at him, the bond would flare. And she was barely holding on as it was. "You should sleep," Jeffrey said. His voice was rough. "Tired. It's past midnight." "I can't." Crystal pressed her forehead against the cool glass. "Every time I close my eyes, I see them. The assassins. Daryl's face when I accused him. The way he looked at me like." She stopped. "Like he wanted you dead? Like he knew something I didn't?" Crystal finally turned. Jeffrey sat at his desk, still shirtless from training earlier, his dark hair damp from washing. Scars crisscrossed his chest and shoulders, a roadmap of battles won and enemies defeated. He looked less like a king and more like a warrior who'd fought his way to the throne through blood and bone. The mate bond pulsed hot between them. Crystal gritted her teeth against it. "We can't keep doing this." "Doing what?" "Pretending it doesn't exist." She gestured between them. "The bond. Shadow and Ivory. They're tearing us apart, trying to get to each other." Jeffrey's amber eyes met hers. In the firelight, they looked molten. "I feel it too. Every second. It's like standing too close to a fire. I know I should step back, but I can't make myself move." "Then why are we fighting it?" "Because you're my sister." The words sounded hollow. "Wrong. The blood mark. Ivory says you're not my brother." Crystal stepped away from the window. "My wolf has never been wrong. Not once in 3 years." She knew which streams were poisoned. She knew which caves had bears. She knew when hunters were tracking us before I could smell them. And she's been screaming since the moment we met that you're our mate. Not our brother. Our mate." Jeffrey stood slowly. "Wolves can be wrong. Not about this." Crystal closed the distance between them until she was standing on the other side of his desk. "You feel it too." "I know you do." Shadow recognizes Ivory the same way she recognizes him. Jeffrey's hands clenched on the desk. "It doesn't matter what they feel. We can't." "Then prove it." Crystal's voice was steady. Challenging. "Do the blood test. The old magic. The kind that can't be faked or manipulated. If we're really siblings, the test will show it. And if we're not." "If we're not," Jeffrey finished quietly, "then everything changes." The silence stretched between them, heavy with possibilities, neither of them dared voice. Finally, Jeffrey nodded. "All right. Tomorrow. I'll summon the court mage." But they both knew tomorrow was a lifetime away. The court mage arrived at dawn, an ancient wolf named Kale with silver eyes and hands that glowed faintly with power. He set up his ritual in Jeffrey's study, drawing symbols on the floor in crushed moonstone and salt. "Blood of the accused," he said, gesturing to Crystal. "And blood of the accuser." Jeffrey handed her a ceremonial knife. 3 drops. Into the bowl. Crystal's hands didn't shake as she cut her palm. 3 drops of crimson fell into the silver bowl, mixing with the moonstone dust. Jeffrey did the same, his blood joining hers. Kale began to chant. The air in the study grew heavy. Electric. The symbols on the floor began to glow, first white, then shifting through colors Crystal didn't have names for. The blood in the bowl started to bubble, steam rising as the magic worked. Crystal couldn't breathe. Couldn't move. Everything hinged on this. If they were siblings, the bond was a curse. A cruel joke by fate. They'd spend the rest of their lives fighting an attraction that could never be fulfilled. But if they weren't? The glow faded. Kale lifted the bowl, examining the contents with eyes that saw more than human sight. His expression was unreadable. "Well?" Jeffrey's voice was tight. Kale set the bowl down. "No shared bloodline. You are not siblings by birth." The world stopped. Crystal's knees buckled. Jeffrey caught her before she fell, his hands gripping her arms. The moment he touched her, the mate bond exploded, no longer forbidden, no longer wrong, just pure, undeniable truth. "How?" Crystal whispered. The scar belongs to House Silvermoon, Cale said. Not Thorne. The blood marks are similar, but not identical. He pointed to Jeffrey's shoulder. Thorns carry the waning crescent. Silvermoons carry the waxing crescent. The curve faces opposite directions. Crystal looked at her scar. Then at Jeffrey's. He was right. Mirror images. Not matches. House Silvermoon was destroyed 19 years ago, Jeffrey said. The entire bloodline was wiped out during the same coup that killed my parents. Cale nodded. Apparently not. One survived. Crystal's mind reeled. Not a Thorne. Not an Ashwood. Silvermoon. A house she'd never heard of. A bloodline thought extinct. Then who am I? Her voice broke. Jeffrey's hands tightened on her arms. You're exactly who you've always been. A survivor. A fighter. Someone too stubborn to die. His amber eyes burned into hers. And you're my mate. Not my sister. My mate. The words hung between them heavy with relief and desire, and 3 days of torture finally ending. Crystal's hands came up, fisting in his shirt. Jeffrey. He kissed her. It wasn't gentle. I wasn't careful. It was 3 days of fighting the bond, 3 days of torture, 3 days of wanting something they thought they could never have, all of it exploding in a single moment. Jeffrey's mouth claimed hers with desperate hunger. His hands tangled in her hair, pulling her closer, like he could fuse them together through sheer will. Crystal kissed him back just as fiercely, her nails digging into his shoulders, 3 years of isolation and loneliness pouring into the contact. Inside their minds, Shadow and Ivory howled in triumph. Mate. Ours. Finally. Claim. The bond snapped into place completely, no longer fought, no longer denied. It was like a dam breaking, flooding them both with sensation so intense Crystal gasped against Jeffrey's mouth. She felt his wolf. Felt Shadow's protective fury and primal need. Felt the way he'd been watching her since the moment she walked into the throne room, fighting every instinct that screamed mine. And he felt Ivory. Felt her feral strength and desperate loneliness. Felt 3 years of survival and pain and refusing to break. They pulled apart, breathing hard. Jeffrey's forehead pressed against hers. I've wanted to do that since you threatened to kill me in your cell. I still might. But Crystal's voice was shaking. If you make me wear another silk dress. He laughed, a real sound, rough and relieved. No more silk. I promise. Cale cleared his throat. If you're finished, Your Majesty, there's one more thing you should know. Jeffrey didn't step away from Crystal. His hand found hers, their fingers lacing together. What? House Silvermoon wasn't just any bloodline. Cale's silver eyes were grave. They were the only wolves powerful enough to challenge the Thorns for the crown. If Crystal is Silvermoon, if the bloodline survived, then whoever orchestrated the coup 19 years ago didn't just want control. They wanted to eliminate any threat to their claim. Crystal's blood ran cold. Daryl. Not just Daryl, Jeffrey said, his voice darkening. Someone gave him orders. Someone with enough power to orchestrate 2 royal assassinations and frame innocent wolves. Someone who's been pulling strings for 19 years. Crystal looked up at him. What do we do? Jeffrey's grip on her hand tightened. We finish what they started. We expose them. And we make them pay. But if Crystal was Silvermoon royalty, that meant Daryl hadn't just framed the Ashwoods. He'd orchestrated the genocide of an entire royal house. The blood moon hung in the sky like a wound. It cast everything in shades of crimson and shadow, the courtyard, the towers, the faces of hundreds of wolves gathered for the ancient ceremony. The air thrummed with power. On nights like this, when the moon turned red, the barriers between wolf and human grew thin. Instincts sharpened. Magic bled through. It was sacred. Traditional. A night of peace and unity for all packs under the crown. Which made it the perfect night for murder. Crystal stood beside Jeffrey on the ceremonial platform, wearing armor instead of silk. She'd refused the dress Lady Morgana had sent, white lace and pearls, meant to make her look innocent and delicate. Instead, she wore leather and steel, a sword belted at her hip that she'd taken from the royal armory. She looked like what she was. A survivor. A fighter. A wolf who'd learned that pretty things got you killed. Jeffrey's hand found hers beneath the folds of his ceremonial cloak. The mate bond hummed between them, warm, constant, grounding. 2 days since the blood test. 2 days since the kiss that had shattered every wall between them. 2 days of stolen moments and whispered plans and the growing certainty that something was about to break. "Stay close," Jeffrey murmured. Only she could hear him. "I don't trust this." "Neither do I." Crystal scanned the crowd. Nobles in their finest. Warriors in dress armor. And scattered throughout too many unfamiliar faces. Wolves she didn't recognize, wearing colors that didn't match any pack allegiance. Mercenaries. The ceremony began at midnight. Elder wolves chanted in the old tongue, calling on the moon goddess for blessing and protection. Wine was poured into ceremonial cups, one for each member of the royal family. Jeffrey. Crystal. Lady Morgana. Morgana stood across from them, elegant in deep purple silk, her silver hair woven with rubies that caught the moonlight like drops of blood. She smiled as she lifted her cup. "To unity," she said, her voice carrying across the silent courtyard. "To bloodlines old and new. To the strength of the Thorn crown." The crowd echoed her. "To the crown." Crystal lifted her cup. The wine inside was dark red, almost black in the moonlight. It smelled sweet. Too sweet. Underneath the spices and honey was something else. Something metallic. Ivory stirred, suddenly alert. "Wrong. Poison. Don't drink." Crystal's fingers tightened on the cup. She met Morgana's eyes across the platform. The older woman's smile widened, just slightly. Expectant. "She knows." Everything happened at once. Crystal threw the cup. Wine splashed across the stone, hissing where it landed, the silver particles in the liquid reacting with the moonlight, burning like acid. Morgana's smile vanished. She raised her hand and 20 wolves in the crowd surged forward, weapons drawn. "Traitor!" Morgana screamed, pointing at Crystal. "She attacks the royal family. Seize her." Jeffrey moved. His sword cleared its sheath in a blur of steel. "Stand down." But the mercenaries didn't stand down. They charged the platform, blades aimed for Jeffrey and Crystal both. The real royal guards, Jeffrey's loyalists, drew their weapons, forming a protective circle. Steel clashed against steel. Blood sprayed across ceremonial stones. The coup had begun. Daryl appeared from the crowd, his scarred face twisted with desperation and fury. He'd shed his enforcer leathers for full combat armor, a massive war axe gripped in both hands. Behind him, more mercenaries poured into the courtyard like a flood. "You should have died in the Wastelands." Daryl roared, swinging his axe at Crystal. She drew her sword and barely blocked the strike. The impact sent shockwaves up her arms. Daryl was massive, twice her size, trained in combat since childhood. She had 3 years of survival instinct and a white wolf screaming for blood. "You killed them." Crystal snarled, ducking under another swing. "The Silvermoons. The Ashwoods. All of them. They were obstacles." Daryl kicked at her, catching her in the ribs. Crystal hit the ground hard, her sword skittering away. The Silvermoons were too powerful. They would have challenged Morgana's claim. "We had to eliminate them." "Morgana?" Jeffrey was fighting 3 mercenaries at once, his movements brutal and efficient. "She's behind this?" Morgana stood at the edge of the platform, watching the chaos with cold satisfaction. "You think your father would have named you heir if I hadn't removed his wife and her brat? You think you'd be king if the Silvermoon still existed to challenge your right? You murdered my parents." Jeffrey's voice was lethally calm even as he drove his sword through a mercenary's chest. "You orchestrated everything. I secured the throne for Thorn blood." Morgana's eyes blazed. "Your father was weak. He would have shared power with the Silvermoons. But I gave you an empire. I made you king. You made me a puppet." Jeffrey threw his blade. It buried itself in Morgana's shoulder. She stumbled back, gasping. Daryl's axe came down again. Crystal rolled, but not fast enough. The blade cut her shoulder, the same shoulder that bore her Silvermoon scar. Silver-laced steel tore through leather and skin, burning like liquid fire. Crystal screamed. The pain was blinding. Absolute. Silver poisoning flooded her veins, racing toward her heart. Ivory held inside her mind a sound of pure agony and rage. The white wolf threw herself against Crystal's mental barriers, desperate to break free, to heal, to kill. Let me out. Shift. Fight. Kill them all. No, Crystal gasped. If she shifted, everyone would see. The white wolf. The glowing fur. The ancient power. She'd be hunted. Killed. Mounted on a wall. But Daryl was raising his axe again. And she was bleeding out on the ceremonial stones. Jeffrey appeared, a blur of fury and steel. He caught Daryl's axe with his bare hands, blood running down his fingers where the blade bit into his palms. His eyes flared pure gold. Shadow surging to the surface. Touch her again, Jeffrey growled, and I'll tear your throat out with my teeth. He ripped the axe from Daryl's grip and drove it into the enforcer's leg. Daryl went down screaming. More mercenaries closed in. 12. 2 dozen. Too many. Jeffrey's guards were outnumbered, being pushed back toward the platform's edge. Morgana had planned this perfectly and waited until the blood moon when emotions ran high and violence came easy. Jeffrey dropped to his knees beside Crystal, his hands pressing against her bleeding shoulder. The silver was spreading through her veins like black ink, visible beneath her skin. Her lips were turning blue. Stay with me, Jeffrey begged. The mate bond was screaming, tearing him apart as he felt her dying. Crystal, please. Can't. Crystal's vision was going dark. Silver. Too much. Then shift. Jeffrey's voice broke. Let Ivory heal you. I don't care if they see. I don't care about anything except you living. Crystal looked up at him. At the desperation in his amber eyes. At the blood covering his hands, some his, some hers, some belonging to enemies who tried to kill them. She'd spent 3 years hiding. 3 years poisoning herself to keep Ivory locked away. 3 years believing that exposure meant death. But dying meant Jeffrey would face this alone. And she'd survived too much to quit now. Crystal let go. She stopped fighting. Stopped suppressing. Stopped hiding. And Ivory exploded free. The transformation was violent. Beautiful. Terrifying. Crystal's back arched as her bones began to crack and reshape. Her skin rippled, white fur bursting through in waves. Her face elongated into a muzzle. Her hands became massive paws tipped with black claws. Light flooded the courtyard, not moonlight, but something brighter. Purer. The white wolf's glow. Crystal collapsed, silver still burning through her veins. Ivory screamed inside her. And for the first time in 3 years, she let the white wolf free. Chapter 8, The White Wolf's Judgment. The transformation tore through Crystal like lightning splitting a tree. Her spine arched impossibly, vertebrae cracking and reshaping with sounds like breaking branches. Her skin rippled, white fur erupting in waves that glowed with inner light. Her face elongated, human screams turning to wolf howls halfway through. Bones shattered and reformed. Muscles tore and rebuilt themselves stronger, denser, inhuman. It hurt. God, it hurts. 3 years of suppression breaking all at once. 3 years of poison and starvation and forcing Ivory down. All of it reversing in seconds. The pain was absolute, every nerve on fire, every cell rewriting itself. But underneath the agony was something else. Power. The white wolf rose from Crystal's collapsing human form like a phoenix from ash. Ivory was massive. Larger than any she-wolf, should be nearly the size of an alpha, built for war instead of grace. Her fur was pure white, each strand glowing with pale luminescence like moonlight made solid. Her eyes burned ice blue, ancient and terrible. When she breathed, frost formed in the air. The courtyard went silent. Even the fighting stopped. Mercenaries froze mid-swing. Royal guards lowered their weapons. Every wolf friend and enemy alike stared at the creature standing on the ceremonial platform. The white wolf. The legend. The extinct bloodline. Standing there. Alive. Glowing like a fallen star. Ivory shook out her massive frame, and the movement sent ripples of power across the courtyard. The temperature dropped 10 degrees in an instant. Torches guttered and dimmed. The blood moon seemed to pulse brighter, as if recognizing one of its own. The silver in Crystal's shoulder still burned, black veins spreading beneath white fur, but Ivory's ancient magic was already fighting it. Pushing it back. Burning it out with pure, concentrated moonlight. Daryl scrambled backward, his wounded leg dragging. Impossible. The Silvermoons are dead. We killed them all. Ivory's head swung toward him. The white wolf didn't growl. Didn't snarl. She simply looked at him with eyes that had seen empires rise and fall, and Daryl's voice died in his throat. Morgana stood at the platform's edge, clutching her bleeding shoulder. Her face had gone gray. No. No, you can't be. Ivory opened her jaws and spoke. Not in wolf sounds. Not in howls or growls or anything natural. She spoke with the voice of dominance, the ancient command that only royal bloodlines could wield. It was a sound that bypassed the ears and went straight to the soul. Kneel. The word wasn't shouted. It was a statement of absolute authority. A command from something older than kingdoms, older than crowns, older than the very concept of hierarchy. And every wolf in the courtyard obeyed. Mercenaries dropped to their knees like puppets with cut strings. Royal guards fell to the ground, exposing their throats in submission. Nobles in their finest silks pressed their foreheads to the blood-stained stones. Even the Alpha's warriors who'd never bowed to anyone, collapsed under the sheer weight of Ivory's presence. Daryl hit the ground so hard his teeth cracked. Morgana fell beside him, gasping, her body forced down by power she couldn't resist. Only Jeffrey remained standing. He'd shifted during the chaos, shadow emerging in a blur of midnight fur and gold eyes. The massive black wolf stood beside Ivory, matching her size, his alpha presence burning just as bright. But he didn't fight her command. He stood as her equal. Her mate. Her king. Together, they were terrifying. Ivory's gaze swept the courtyard over the kneeling mercenaries, the trembling nobles, the guards who tried to protect them. Then her ice-blue eyes fixed on Morgana. The temperature dropped another 10 degrees. Frost crept across the stones. Confess. The voice of dominance wrapped around Morgana like chains. She tried to resist, lips pressed tight, jaw clenched, but the command was absolute. Irresistible. It pulled the truth from her throat like drawing poison from a wound. I orchestrated the coup, Morgana gasped. The words came out strangled, forced. I killed King Aldrich and Queen Seraphine. I stole the Silvermoon child and gave her to the Ashwoods to hide. When they refused to kill her, when they tried to protect her, I framed them for treason. Shocked gasps rippled through the kneeling crowd. Why? Jeffrey's voice was a growl, Shadow's fury bleeding through. Morgana's face twisted with rage and desperation. Because the Silvermoons were more powerful than the Thorns. Their bloodline was stronger. If they'd survived, they would have taken the crown. I couldn't allow it. I wanted Thorn blood on the throne. Pure. Unchallenged. So you murdered children. Ivory's voice made the stones tremble. You destroyed families. You built your power on genocide. I did what was necessary. Morgana screamed. Then her eyes widened. She'd said too much, admitted too much. The voice of dominance had stripped away every lie, every defense. She lunged. Pure desperation. A knife appeared in her hand, silver blade, probably poisoned. She launched herself at Ivory with the strength of someone who had nothing left to lose. Ivory didn't move. She simply exhaled. The white wolf's breath hit Morgana like a physical wall. Not air, but concentrated power moonlight made solid, ancient magic condensed into a shockwave. It caught Morgana mid-leap and hurled her backward with impossible force. She flew 20 feet through the air and slammed into the stone wall of the courtyard with a sound like shattering pottery. Her body hit once. Crumpled. Didn't get up. Blood pooled beneath her silver hair. The court watched in absolute silence. Ivory turned to Daryl. He was still pinned to the ground by her command, shaking, his scarred face slick with sweat. Please, he begged. I was following orders. Morgana, she made me. You chose. Ivory stepped closer, her massive paws silent on the stones. You murdered the Silvermoons. You framed the Ashwoods. You hunted me for 3 years. Those were your choices. I'll confess. I'll tell the court everything. Just spare me. You executed children. Ivory's ice blue eyes blazed. Inside her mind, Crystal's human consciousness stirred, remembering the Ashwood children who'd burned alongside their parents. Remembering the screams. You framed innocence. You deserve no mercy. Shadow moved beside her. Jeffrey's black wolf stepped forward, his gold eyes fixed on Daryl with lethal intent. Together, the white wolf and the black king delivered judgment. It was quick. Brutal. Final. When it was done, Ivory lifted her head and howled. The sound pierced the night, not a howl of victory, but of mourning. For the Silvermoons who'd died. For the Ashwoods who'd protected her. For 3 years of running and hiding and surviving when she should have been able to live. Shadow joined her howl. Their voices intertwined, white and black, moonlight and shadow, 2 halves of a whole finally united. The royal guards were the first to rise. Then the nobles. One by one, wolves got to their feet and dropped to one knee. Not in submission. In recognition. The white wolf had returned. And she was not a prisoner. She was a queen. The throne room didn't look the same. 3 months of rebuilding had transformed it from a cold cathedral of stone and shadows into something else. Something wild. The massive windows had been replaced with open archways that let in moonlight and wind. Vines grew up the pillars, deliberately cultivated night-blooming jasmine and silver moss that glowed faintly in the dark. The floor was still stone, but now paths of earth ran through it, lined with white flowers that only opened under the moon. It looked like the Wastelands had invaded the citadel. Like nature was reclaiming what humanity had tried to cage. Crystal stood at the center of it all, waiting. She wore armor. Not a gown of silk and lace, not the delicate finery the court had tried to dress her in for weeks. She wore battle-worn leather and steel, the kind that moved with her body, that didn't restrict or constrain. Her dark hair was loose, wild, tangled with small braids threaded through with silver cord. The crescent scar on her shoulder was visible, deliberate, proudly displayed. She looked like what she was. A survivor. A fighter. A wolf who refused to be tamed. The court filled the throne room with hundreds of nobles and warriors and common wolves, all gathered to witness the impossible. The coronation of a bloodline thought extinct. The rise of a queen who'd spent 3 years drinking poison and sleeping in mud just to stay alive. Jeffrey stood beside the throne, wearing his own armor, black and crimson, the crown of thorns resting on his dark hair. But this wasn't his coronation. This was hers. And when his amber eyes met Crystal's across the room, the mate bond hummed warm between them. Pride. Love. Partnership. The ceremony began at midnight under the full moon, not the blood moon of violence, but the silver moon of renewal. Elder Kale stood between Crystal and Jeffrey, his hands glowing with ancient magic as he spoke the old words. Crystal Silvermoon, Kale said, his voice carrying across the silent hall. Last daughter of House Silvermoon. Survivor of genocide. Chosen of the White Wolf. Do you accept the crown and all it demands? Crystal's voice was steady. I do. Will you rule with wisdom and strength? Will you protect the weak and punish the corrupt? Will you honor the old ways while building the new? I will. Kale turned to Jeffrey. Alpha King Jeffrey Thorne. Do you acknowledge this woman as your equal? Not as consort, not as subordinate, but as sovereign in her own right? Jeffrey stepped forward. In his hands, he held a crown, but not the delicate circlet the old kings had given their queens. This was forged from silver and blackened steel, woven with thorns and moonflowers. A crown for a warrior. A crown for a wolf who'd earned her throne in blood. I acknowledge her, Jeffrey said, his voice ringing through the hall. Not just as my queen, but as my equal. My mate. My partner in all things. He placed the crown on Crystal's head. The weight of it settled against her temples, heavy, real, undeniable. The court erupted in howls. Not cheers. Howls. A sound of recognition from every wolf in the room. The White Wolf was crowned. In the months since the Blood Moon coup, the kingdom had transformed. Crystal and Jeffrey had purged the corruption that had rotted the court for decades. Nobles who'd supported Morgana, who'd known about the genocide and said nothing, were stripped of their titles. The council was rebuilt from the ground up, chosen not by bloodline but by merit. Warriors who'd fought for justice. Scholars who valued truth. Healers who'd served the people. The old guard resisted. They called her a savage. A wasteland wolf playing at royalty. They said she didn't know how to rule, didn't understand politics, didn't belong on the throne. Crystal proved them wrong. She instituted new laws, protections for omegas, rights for the packless, trials for accused criminals instead of summary executions. She opened the royal archives to the public, exposing every lie Morgana had buried. She tore down the pelts mounted in the throne room, white wolves and rare bloodlines displayed like trophies, and burned them in the courtyard. And once a month, she disappeared. Back to the wastelands. Back to the poisoned streams and dead forests where she'd learned to survive. She shifted into ivory and ran wild, hunting and sleeping under open sky, reminding herself where she'd come from. Jeffrey never stopped her. He understood. The crown was power, but freedom was breath. And Crystal needed both to live. Tonight, after the coronation feast, they stood together on the balcony of the royal chambers. The city sprawled below them, thousands of lights flickering in the darkness. The kingdom they ruled. The people they protected. Crystal shifted first. The transformation was easier now. Painless. Ivory flowed out of her human form like water, white fur rippling into existence, ice-blue eyes glowing in the moonlight. She was still massive, still glowing, still terrifying and beautiful in equal measure. Jeffrey shifted beside her. Shadow emerged, midnight black with gold eyes, matching Ivory's size, her perfect counterpart. They stood side by side, two wolves who should never have met. A stolen princess and an orphaned king. A white wolf and a black wolf. Moonlight and shadow. Ivory tilted her head back and howled. The sound pierced the night, not mourning this time, but triumph. Joy. Freedom. Everything she'd fought for, everything she'd survived, everything she'd become. Shadow joined her. Their voices intertwined, rising together into the darkness. Inside Ivory's mind, Crystal's human consciousness stirred. 3 years ago, she'd been a terrified girl drinking poison to stay alive. Now she was a queen. A mate. A force of nature that kingdoms bent to accommodate. We survived, Ivory's voice echoed in her mind, warm and certain. We claimed our truth. And we are free. Crystal let herself sink into the white wolf's consciousness completely. Let Ivory run along the balcony's edge, let her leap and play and howl at the moon without fear of hunters or chains or death. Because she was free. Finally, truly free. Not despite the crown, but because of it. They dragged the girl with the white wolf before the Alpha King. She wasn't supposed to survive. But survival was never the endgame. Power was. And she took it.